The wind screamed across the high plains with such force that it took the warmth out of everything that was exposed. Ice crystals formed in the air itself, and each gust blew them across the ground like tiny knives. Outside the general store, the thermometer said it was 6 degrees below zero. But the wind chill made the temperature feel like it was below 20 degrees, which is cold enough to freeze skin in a matter of minutes. Steam rose from a small metal chimney that was part of a strange circular arrangement on the edge of town. The chimney went through the roof of an old railroad caboose. Around the old red building, huge round hay bales stood guard in a perfect circle, weighing more than 12 tons in total. Each bale was 5 feet wide and almost as tall, and they were tightly wrapped in hemp twine. Together, they made a wall that turned the howling wind into a whisper. Copper, a chestnut mare, stood quietly in the safe area between the hay wall and the fence of the inner corral. The cold air made her breath form clouds, but her sides didn't shake, which is a sign of cold stress. The wind that blew through the county and ruined everything else barely touched her man. Sam sat comfortably inside the caboose at 48 degrees. His potbelly stove burned about 4 logs a day. His neighbors were feeding their stoves 3 times as much and still having trouble staying warm. 3 months earlier, folks had laughed at what they called the hay fort. They said it looked like a child's attempt at building a castle, that no serious rancher would stack feed in circles like some wagon train circled against attack. The loudest critics had been men with barns twice the size of the strange little setup, traditional structures that represented years of carpentry and thousands of board feet of lumber. But on this January night, with temperatures at 6 below and wind gusts hitting 40 miles per hour sustained for 18 hours straight, those same barns were losing the battle against winter. Horses clustered together for warmth, where drafts found every gap. Ranchers burned through firewood supplies at alarming rates. Doors buried under 7-foot drifts required hours of labor just to access. Meanwhile, the hay fort stood calm and functional. Its southern gate remained clear. Its interior was nearly 10 degrees warmer than the open air. Its fuel consumption ran at a fraction of comparable shelters. Sam had arrived in September, a quiet man of 32 who'd spent the previous 8 years surveying routes for the railroad across 3 territories. His work had taught him to observe, measure, and calculate. Survey crews didn't survive by guessing. They survived by understanding how wind carved snow into drifts, how temperature affected different materials, and how geometry influenced airflow patterns. He'd learned something crucial from watching section crews work through brutal winters at isolated railroad camps. The railroad didn't fight the wind with brute force. They understood it, measured it, and designed around it. A well-placed snow fence could make the difference between a clear track and impassable drifts. The geometry mattered more than the materials. He'd purchased a small parcel on the northern edge of town, 5 acres of prairie grass with decent access to the main road. The land came with a chestnut mare named Copper and an old railroad caboose. His plan was modest. Start a freight operation hauling goods between the railroad depot 20M East and the scattered homesteads throughout the county. The caboose sat on its wheels 18 in off the ground, measuring 12 feet long by 8 feet wide inside. Sam cleaned it thoroughly, replaced broken glass, and got the door working smoothly. The potbelly stove was solid cast iron, though the chimney needed replacement. The basic structure was sound. Railroad cars were built to last. During his first week in town, he watched neighbors prepare for winter with the careful attention he'd learned surveying. Most had traditional barns or 3-sided lean-tos. All faced the same problem when wind picked up. Sam had seen it at every railroad camp from Nebraska to Montana. Wind didn't just make things cold. It actively stripped heat away through convective transfer. A horse standing in still air at 20 degrees could maintain body temperature with normal effort. The same horse in 20 degrees air with 20 miles per hour wind experienced conditions equivalent to 0 degrees. The moving air constantly swept away the warm layer near the animal's body. At extreme wind speeds, horses could lose body heat 5 times faster than in calm conditions. The traditional barns helped, but they created their own problems. The rectangular structures generated predictable low-pressure zones on their leeward sides. Snow didn't fall evenly. It drifted, piling up wherever geometry created the right conditions. 6 feet drifts against one wall, while the opposite side stayed clear. Railroad engineers had learned to design stations with rounded edges and strategic placement. The same principles would work for livestock shelter. He sketched his idea one evening in the caboose, working by lamplight with paper and pencil. A circle of round hay bales, each weighing between 1,200 and 1,800 pounds, depending on moisture content. The circle would be 60 feet across, measured carefully from the center point to create a perfect radius. The caboose would sit at dead center. A corral fence would run just inside the hay bale ring, creating a protected zone for Copper while keeping her away from feed unless he was actively distributing it. The bales would serve three purposes simultaneously, and that efficiency appealed to Sam's surveyor's mind. First, as a windbreak that eliminated the corners where drifts typically formed. The circular geometry would deflect, wind up, and over rather than channeling it into high-speed streams or creating turbulent pockets. Second, as a massive insulating barrier. That much hay packed tight would create a microclimate inside the circle, moderating temperature swings and reducing wind speed by 70% or more. Third, as winter feed stored exactly where it would be needed, eliminating the labor of hauling hay through deep snow from a distant storage location. The mathematics worked out cleanly. Each bale measured approximately 5 feet in diameter, placed side by side around the perimeter of a 60-foot diameter circle. He calculated the need for roughly 38 bales to complete the ring with minimal gaps at 1,500 pounds per bale as an average that represented over 28 tons of material, creating a barrier. When he factored in a second layer of bales on the North Arc, where prevailing winter winds would hit hardest, the total weight approached 40 tons. That sheer mass mattered for thermal stability. Hay was actually an excellent insulator full of trapped air pockets that resisted heat transfer. The massive volume would absorb solar radiation during the day and release it slowly at night, moderating the temperature swings that made winter nights so brutal. More importantly, the circular shape would force wind to flow up and over the barrier rather than through it, creating a protected zone in the center where both he and Copper could weather even severe storms. He mentioned his plan at the general store on a Saturday morning in late September. The store was crowded with ranchers picking up supplies before the first real cold snap, which usually arrived in early October on the high plains. The conversation had been running to winter preparations, comparing notes on hay harvests and wood supplies, and the condition of various barns and shelters. Ed Brennan stood near the counter, a weathered man of 55 who'd been raising horses in the territory for 23 years. He had strong opinions on proper winter management, backed by experience that commanded respect. When Sam mentioned his plan to stack hay in a circle, Brennan set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Are you planning to stack hay in a circle?" His tone suggested he'd heard wrong. "That's right," Sam said. "Around my caboose, creating a 60-foot circle wind barrier that also serves as feed storage right where it's needed. Hay goes in a barn or under a roof," Brennan said firmly. "Principles of good ranching. You stack it outside, exposed to weather. You'll have every wandering cow for 5 miles breaking through to get at it. Wind will tear the wrapping off the bales. Snow will soak into it. You'll waste half your winter feed before Christmas." Marcus Webb, who owned the largest spread in the county and the finest barn in 3 territories, laughed outright from his position near the window. His barn had cost $3,000 to build 5 years earlier, a massive structure with oak beams and fitted walls that represented the pinnacle of traditional ranching infrastructure. "I've got a barn that cost me $3,000 to build." Webb said, 10 horses winter in there, comfortable as can be. "You think you're going to do better in a railroad shack surrounded by hay bales?" He shook his head. "Boy, you're new to this country. Winter here isn't something you experiment with. Winter here kills people who don't know what they're doing. The caboose is for me," Sam explained patiently. "Copper gets the protected circle. The principle is geometric. Wind can't build up speed inside a round barrier. The circular shape forces air to deflect upward instead of channeling horizontally. Creates a calm zone in the center where she can maintain body temperature without fighting constant convection loss. Wind goes wherever it wants." Webb said, "You can't stop weather with hay bales." Tom Mercer, whose property adjoined Sam's, spoke up more kindly. "I appreciate you're trying to save money, but you'll regret it come January. That horse is going to freeze, and you'll be burning through firewood twice as fast in that little tin box." Sam kept his voice even. "The caboose has 4 inches walls with air gaps. Once I seal the gaps and get the stove running steady, it'll hold heat better than most houses. And the hay ring will cut wind speed inside the circle by 70% or more. Less wind means Copper keeps her body heat instead of losing it to convection. Convection, Webb repeated, smirking. You sound like one of those college boys. This is cattle country. We don't need fancy words. We need solid barns. The nickname started that afternoon. By evening, half the town was calling it the Hay Fort. Some said it with amusement, others with genuine concern that the new fellow was going to lose his horse to his own foolishness. Sam didn't argue. He'd seen this before at railroad camps. Traditional methods got defended hard, even when they weren't working as well as they could. He thanked the men for their concern and went back to his planning. The first task was establishing the circle's precise center and radius. Sam drove a sturdy oak stake where the caboose would sit, then used a 30-foot rope as a compass. He walked a complete circle at constant tension, pausing every 8 feet to drive guide stakes. The result was a perfect circle marked by 16 reference points. The caboose needed substantial work. Sam spent 3 days sealing gaps with tin strips and caulking compound, paying particular attention to corners. The walls consisted of wooden panels over a framework with an air gap between layers. This unintentional insulation would work beautifully once the gaps were sealed. The pot-belly stove was solid cast iron, but the chimney had rusted through. Sam fabricated a replacement from stovepipe, running it straight up through the roof with careful flashing. The structure measured 12 feet by 8 feet internally, giving him 96 square feet. Small, but that compact volume meant less air to warm. He tested the heating on a cool October evening. With gaps sealed in a moderate fire, interior temperature climbed to 68 degrees while outside sat at 42. The walls held warm. The elevated floor prevented ground heat loss. A single arm load of wood maintained comfort for 6 hours. The test confirmed his calculations. Next came the hay delivery. Sam had arranged purchase of 40 round bales from a rancher 15 miles south. Each bale measured 5 feet across and 4.5 feet tall, wrapped tight with hemp twine. The delivery cost ran $1 per bale plus hauling, bringing total hay investment to $55. Double purpose for single cost, feeding copper, while serving as windbreak material. Placement required careful work. Each bale weighed 1,500 pounds. Sam borrowed draft horses from Tom Mercer along with a sturdy sled. He started on the north side where winter winds would hit hardest, rolling each bale into position along the marked circle. The technique required coordination. Position sled, tip bale onto sled using leverage, drag to position, tip off, and roll into place. The bales needed to sit tight with minimal gaps, where small voids appeared between curved surfaces. Sam packed them with loose hay, eliminating wind channels. The work took 5 days, 38 bales, forming an unbroken circle with only a 6 FT southern gap for entry. The wall stood 5 foot tall and thick. The effect was immediate. With a steady 15 miles per hour breeze from the northwest, Sam could feel the difference inside the circle. The air moved without the aggressive force it carried in open space. The massive hay wall absorbed and deflected wind energy, creating exactly the calm zone he'd anticipated. Ed Brennan stopped by that afternoon. "You're really going through with this. Just finish the base ring," Sam said, planning to add a second layer on the north and west sides where the wind hits hardest. "That's a lot of feed sitting out in the weather. Tight wrapped bales shed water pretty well," Sam said, "and I'll be working through them all winter. Probably have the whole ring consumed by March." Brennan walked around the circle, studying it. "Your horse is going to push right through these to get at the hay. That's why the fence goes up tomorrow," Sam said. "Corral panels just inside the hay ring. Keeps copper in the protected zone, but away from the bales unless I'm feeding her." "If you say so." Brennan shook his head. "I'll give you this. It's different, but different doesn't mean better." The fence installation took 2 days. Standard corral panels, 6 foot tall, formed a circle 45 feet in diameter. This left a 7.5 foot gap between the fence and the hay bales. Plenty of room to walk around and roll out hay for feeding. The gate faced south, aligned with the gap in the hay wall. Sam added the second layer of bales along the northern arc, creating a double thick barrier 10 foot tall where the wind would hit hardest. This brought his total to 52 bales, over 39 tons of hay and fence, creating what amounted to a portable compound. Marcus Webb rode by during the final day of construction. He sat on his horse outside the circle, looking over the arrangement. "You know what? This reminds me of those forts children build out of furniture and blankets. Children understand shelter instinctively," Sam said. not looking up from a panel he was securing. My barn's got oak beams a foot thick and walls that don't move in any wind. You're gambling your winter comfort on hay that'll rot and a railroad car that was never meant to be lived in. Your barn's beautiful, Sam said honestly, but I'm curious to see how each setup handles the wind. Curiosity is going to leave you mighty cold come January. Webb turned his horse and rode off. Tom Mercer, the neighboring rancher, showed more genuine concern. He stopped by one evening with an offer. I've got space in my barn. Your mare could winter there. No charge. I don't like the idea of an animal suffering because of experimentation. I appreciate that, Sam said, but Kappa's going to be comfortable. This setup's designed specifically for her needs and mine together. All right, Mercer said, but the offer stands if you change your mind. When Mercer's own barn door froze shut during an early cold snap in November, Sam walked over and helped him clear the ice buildup. He didn't mention his own setup, where the southern-facing gate had remained clear. He just helped his neighbor get his door working again. By mid-December, the hay fort was complete and operational. Copper lived inside the circle, moving freely in the protected zone. The caboose stayed warm with minimal wood consumption. Sam worked his freight business through early winter and each evening returned to a setup that required almost no maintenance. No doors to dig out, no corners filling with drifts, and no exposed walls where wind could steal heat. The blizzard arrived on January 7th with a kind of savage intensity that defined High Plains winter. The temperature had been dropping steadily for 3 days, falling from a mild 28 degrees on the 4th down to 12 on the 5th, then 6 on the 6th. By dawn on the 7th, the thermometer outside the general store read 2 degrees above zero, with clear skies that promised even colder conditions once the sun set. Then the wind came. It started as a steady northwest breeze around mid-morning, 15 miles per hour. That felt cold, but manageable. By noon, sustained winds had reached 25 miles per hour, with gusts approaching 35. By 2 in the afternoon, the railroad weather station 70 miles to the east was recording sustained winds of 38 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 47. The combination of low temperature and high wind created dangerous conditions through the wind chill effect. At 2 degrees with 40 miles per hour wind, the effective temperature on exposed skin dropped to 32 below zero. Conditions are lethal to unprepared humans in under an hour, dangerous to livestock that couldn't escape the wind's relentless heat theft. Sam watched the storms approach from inside the caboose, standing at the small window that faced northwest. The first thing he noticed was how the hay bale wall responded to the increasing wind. The massive barrier simply absorbed the impact without movement. 40 tons of compressed hay didn't shift in any wind. The bales sat exactly where he'd positioned them weeks earlier, their combined weight providing absolute stability. Snow began falling around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, light at first, but quickly intensifying to the point where visibility dropped to less than 100 yards. The wind drove the snow nearly horizontal across open ground. Sam watched through the window as the white curtain approached his position, then observed what happened when it hit the hay wall. The snow struck the rounded barrier and reacted exactly as his survey experience had predicted. Instead of piling up against a flat surface or finding corners to fill, the majority of the snow spiraled upward along the curved face of the hay bales. Some made it over the top and fell into the protected interior, but most deflected away entirely. The circular geometry was doing exactly what he designed it to do. Inside the circle, wind speed dropped dramatically. Sam had rigged a simple measurement system weeks earlier, a cloth flag on a 6-foot pole positioned between the hay wall and the corral fence. The flag's behavior gave him a rough but reliable gauge of wind speed. Outside the barrier, the flag would have snapped horizontally with violent force, likely tearing loose entirely. Inside the protected zone, it barely fluttered, moving with the gentle back and forth of light air movement rather than the aggressive streaming of high wind. He estimated interior wind speed at 7 or 8 miles per hour maximum. Given that the exterior wind was hitting close to 40, that represented an 80% reduction. The math matched his predictions almost exactly. The hay barrier was cutting wind speed by 4/5, transforming dangerous conditions into merely uncomfortable ones. Temperature differences showed up within the first few hours of the storm. Sam kept careful records using two thermometers, one mounted outside the caboose door in the protected circle and another inside the structure itself. Outside air temperature, according to the general store measurement, was dropping through 0 toward -4 inside the protected circle, but outside the caboose, his thermometer read 2 degrees. Inside the caboose, with a moderate fire burning, the temperature held steady at 48 degrees. His fuel consumption told an important story. Sam had calculated that maintaining 50 degrees in the caboose under severe wind conditions would require approximately 15 logs per day, each log being standard firewood size, around 18 in long and 4 in thick. In actual practice, he was using 5 logs per day. The sealed walls and protected location meant he needed only 1/3 the fuel he'd budgeted for worst-case conditions. Copper stood calmly near the caboose, her winter coat fluffed, but showing none of the stress that came from fighting wind. In open air at -6 degrees with 40 miles per hour wind, a horse lost heat fast enough to become dangerously cold within hours, burning through body reserves trying to maintain core temperature. Inside the protected circle, she maintained warmth with normal effort, her breathing steady and unlabored. The snow accumulation told the story most clearly. Outside the hay wall, drifts formed wherever wind found an obstacle. Against Tom Mercer's barn, snow piled 7 feet deep on the north side. The rectangular structure created perfect conditions for drift formation. Ed Brennan's 3-sided lean-to faced similar problems. The corners acted as snow traps, and the gaps in the walls funneled wind through at accelerated speeds. Inside the hay fort, snow fell more or less evenly. The circular barrier prevented the formation of deep drifts. Some snow collected along the base of the hay bales, but the working area between the fence and the bales stayed clear enough to navigate easily. The southern gate remained accessible throughout the storm. By the second day, Sam's neighbors were struggling. Marcus Webb's expensive barn was holding up structurally, but his horses showed signs of cold stress. The building's large interior volume was hard to heat, and gaps around the door and windows allowed wind penetration. His horses clustered together for warmth, their breathing heavy. Tom Mercer spent 6 hours digging out his barn door on the second morning. The drift had reformed overnight. His horses were comfortable enough once inside, but getting to them required constant battle with snow accumulation. Ed Brennan's situation was worse. His lean-to provided minimal wind protection. The horses inside were burning through hay at double the normal rate, trying to maintain body temperature. By the third day, Brennan was getting concerned. He showed up at the hay fort that afternoon, trudging through knee-deep snow outside the circle, but finding the interior much more manageable. He stood at the fence looking at Copper, who stood relaxed and calm. "How's your wood supply holding?" Brennan asked. "Good," Sam said, "using about 4 logs per day." "4 logs? I'm burning 14 just to keep my house comfortable." "How much are you burning for the caboose?" "That's the total," Sam said. 4 logs get me through 24 hours at a comfortable temperature. The walls hold heat well, and I'm not fighting wind." Brennan pulled out a small notebook and pencil. "Do you mind if I take some measurements? Temperature, wind speed, that sort of thing?" "Not at all." Sam walked him through the setup. Outside air temperature, -4. Inside the circle, -1. Wind speed outside is 37 miles per hour. Wind speed inside is 6 miles per hour. Caboose, interior temperature 51 degrees. Brennan did the math in his notebook. "You're using 70% less firewood than I am." Clear's throat about right. Sam said, "Less heat loss means less fuel needed to maintain comfort." Marcus Webb came by the following day with similar questions. He measured the snow depth outside the circle against the depth inside. 7 feet versus 18 inches. The drift reduction was massive. "This shouldn't work," Webb said, but without his earlier mockery. "Hay bales aren't proper building materials. They're not meant to be permanent," Sam agreed. "But for winter shelter, they're remarkably effective. Heavy enough to not blow away, thick enough to block wind, and arranged in a shape that prevents drift formation." Webb looked at his notebook, where he'd been tracking his own fuel consumption. "I've spent $48 on firewood this winter. You probably spent 12. Closer to 10, Sam said quietly. The storm broke on the 4th day. Temperatures rose to 15 degrees, and the wind dropped to a manageable 12 miles per hour. The town dug out slowly. Every traditional barn and stable showed the same pattern. Massive drifts on the north and west sides, clear areas on the south and east, and doors that required significant labor to access. Ed Brennan came by the hay fort with his hat in his hands. I was wrong to laugh. This setup works better than anything I've seen. Different situations need different solutions. Sam said your lean-to served you well for 20 years. This just happens to handle wind better. I'd like to build something similar for next winter. Do you mind walking me through the design? Sam spent the afternoon explaining the principles. The circle diameter should be large enough to house the animals comfortably, but small enough that the hay barrier remains proportionally effective. Bales needed to be placed tight with gaps packed. The entry should face south, where wind was typically weakest. A second layer on the north arc provided extra protection without excessive cost. Brennan took detailed notes on everything, including measurements and the math behind the wind reduction. Within 2 weeks, 3 other ranchers had visited to ask about the design. Sam walked each one through the setup, explaining not just the how, but the why. The physics mattered. Understanding why the circle reduced drift formation helped people adapt the design to their own situations. Tom Mercer built his version that March, ready for the following winter. He modified it slightly using larger bales and creating a bigger circle to accommodate 4 horses instead of 1. The principle remained the same. Heavy barrier, circular formation, protected interior. By the next winter, 11 hay bale circles dotted the county. Some used railroad cars, like Sam's. Others placed small sheds or even large tents at the center. A few ranchers built permanent structures, but still used the hay bale windbreak for winter protection. Each adaptation proved that the core concept was sound. The design spread through word of mouth. A cattle buyer mentioned it at a stockyard 50 miles north. Railroad workers told their crews about the surveyor who'd built a fort out of hay that actually worked. By the third winter, similar setups appeared across 3 territories. Some refinements emerged through collective experience. One rancher discovered that mixing straw bales with hay bales in the outer layer provided even better insulation. Another found that a canvas tarp over the top of a section of bales created a dry storage area for equipment. The basic geometry remained constant, but individual implementations varied based on specific needs. Marcus Webb never built a hay circle himself. His barn was substantial enough that modifications to reduce drift formation made more sense than starting over. But he acknowledged that for operations without existing structures, Sam's design offered remarkable efficiency. He mentioned it to newcomers settling in the area, giving credit where it was due. Over the following decades, the hay bale windbreak became a recognized winter strategy across the plains. It never replaced traditional barns, but it provided an option for people who needed effective shelter without the cost of extensive construction. The design proved particularly valuable during settlement years when families arrived with limited resources, but still needed to protect livestock through brutal winters. Sam continued his freight business for 18 years before selling it and moving to a railroad town where he worked as a station manager. His original caboose setup remained on the property, and the new owner maintained the hay bale circle each winter. Copper lived to age 23, spending every winter in the protected compound that had been designed specifically for her comfort as much as her owners. In later years, agricultural researchers documented the principle behind the design. Circular wind breaks reduced wind speed through geometric deflection rather than brute resistance. The elimination of corners prevented the low-pressure zones where drifts formed. The thermal mass of stacked hay moderated temperature swings within the protected area. What Sam had understood intuitively through railroad experience became established science. The hay bale circle stood as proof that innovation often came from questioning assumptions rather than accepting tradition without examination. Sam had looked at winter shelter not as a permanent structure requiring maximum investment, but as a seasonal need requiring maximum efficiency. By combining readily available materials with sound physics and genuine concern for both human and animal welfare, he'd created something that served both purposes equally well. His willingness to help neighbors who'd initially mocked him, his patient explanation of principles to anyone who asked, and his quiet demonstration that kindness and competence could coexist had mattered as much as the technical design itself. The innovation spread not just because it worked, but because the person who created it remained approachable and generous with his knowledge. This account represents a dramatization of historical frontier innovation principles. principles. While based on documented practices of circular windbreaks and railroad worker adaptations to extreme weather, the specific characters, timeline, and conversations have been constructed to illustrate the technical and social dynamics of 19th century agricultural innovation.
If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next ones. We'll meet again on Hill Destiny with another tale. Take